Madam President, building on the briefing from my colleague ASG Chiari from DPPA, let me turn to the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Since we last briefed this Council 2 weeks ago, civilian harm and suffering have deepened, including over this past weekend. More families have been forced to endure the all too familiar pattern of this war: attacks, destruction, loss, another night without safety. On June 15, strikes on Kyiv and Kharkiv damaged homes and critical infrastructure, leaving well over 100,000 households without power. Again, as mentioned by ASG Chiari, in Kyiv, the Kyiv Pesherik Lavra Monastery, a UNESCO World Heritage Site at the heart of Ukraine's religious and cultural life, was struck and damaged. This site carries centuries of cultural heritage, history, identity that must be protected. In Kharkiv, rescuers responding to an earlier strike were themselves hit when a second one followed. This fits a documented pattern. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has found repeated strikes on ambulances, rescue teams, and aid workers, in some cases, as you heard, hit twice as they returned to help. Civilians have also been struck when simply going about their daily life, in their cars, on buses, in their gardens. The monitoring mission records that more civilians were killed and injured by short-range drones in May than in any month since February 2022. Technological advances in warfare, including drones, are expanding the zone of danger for civilians, which is no longer confined by the reach of artillery. Cheap first-person view drones are causing widespread civilian harm along the front lines. They are equipped with cameras that let the operators see exactly what they are striking. Madam President, we are also concerned by reports of harm to civilians, damage to infrastructure, and associated environmental risks in the Russian Federation, now extending to Moscow itself. The absence of a United Nations monitoring presence does not diminish the seriousness of these reports. Let me reiterate that international humanitarian law binds all parties to this conflict equally, wherever they carry out military operations. This includes an unequivocal obligation to comply with the rules of distinction, proportionality, and precautions throughout this conflict. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, humanitarian partners supported first responders in Kyiv and Kharkiv after the strikes of June 15 with emergency repairs and psychosocial support. Response has continued across multiple regions following subsequent attacks. We continue to support voluntary civilian evacuations and bring assistance to frontline communities in need wherever access allows. But that space is narrowing. Evacuation teams report being tracked and followed by first-person view drones as they try to reach people near the front line, putting civilians aiming to leave the front line, as well as humanitarians, at risk of harm. Every attack on an ambulance, every attack on an aid convoy deprives anyone who would otherwise have been helped. It also affects the very people who are trying to assist: humanitarian personnel, health workers. Madam President, my two asks are not new. They are even more urgent given what we continue to see. First, and again, use your influence to ensure all parties comply with international humanitarian law wherever they take the fight. This means ensuring the protection of civilians and civilian objects, including critical infrastructure and cultural property everywhere. Civilians wanting to evacuate frontline areas must also be allowed to do so in a safe and in a dignified manner, and humanitarian workers must be protected as they carry out their mission. It also means pressing for safe, rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access to civilians in need. Second, provide timely, flexible funding. Without it, the consequences fall on the most vulnerable and least able to move out of harm's way. These resources allow humanitarians to stay and deliver, even as the operating environment becomes more dangerous. For millions of people suffering through these hostilities, what this council does matters greatly. The choices made here can mean the difference between civilians protected, it can make the difference between civilians harmed, and it can make the difference between civilians killed. The choices we made here can mean the difference between aid delivered or aid denied. And the choices made here can mean lives saved or lives lost. I thank you.